Gary Fahey, former head bodyguard for the Prime Minister of Australia. Making sure my pain meant something. Subscribe for more amazing tips, interviews, and wisdom from my phenomenal guests, and click on the link somewhere in the descriptions for your free copy of my 5-day meal plan and exercise ebook. Gary is a true man's man. Espousing Pat McNamara's mantra, learn from the past, prepare for the future, perform in the now, Gary became well known publicly for pleading guilty to fraudulently spending $45,000 in public funds with his police credit card. He lost nearly $2 million and found himself with a suicidal depression and a gambling addiction. Fast forward 5 years, and after starring in the intensely challenging SAS Australia Hell Week, he has been reborn and found his purpose in the next saga of his life's journey. Now an ambassador for the Australian and New Zealand Mental Health Association, a mental strength and peak performance coach, highly sought after speaker and best-selling author, Gary calls on his unique experience and expertise to coach individuals and teams in high-pressure fields, manage mental barriers for high performance. This show is an eye-opener into mental health, turning adversity and failures into success, and as usual, straight talk about all of his journey and lessons learned. You can find out more about Gary at www.garyfahey.com. That's GARYFAHEY.com. And on Insta, check him out at strong.mend. Thanks for watching. Hi, I'm Damien Porter, former Special Forces operator, high performance living coach from eatwellmovewell.net, and you're listening to my Straight Talk Mind and Muscle podcast. Subscribe for more amazing tips, interviews, and wisdom from phenomenal guests, and get your free copy of my 5-day meal plan and exercise ebook at realketonesaustralia.com. This show is sponsored by realketonesaustralia.com, the best and most effective ketone supplement on the market to reduce anxiety, enhance brain performance, and supply twice as much energy as glucose. You can find all my former shows on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Google, Amazon, and Libsyn. Thanks for watching and listening. And we're live. Welcome to the Straight Talk Mind and Muscle podcast. And welcome to my guest, Gary Fahey. Gary, it's great to see you. Thanks for jumping on this morning.
I appreciate it, mate. Thanks for having me on. It's been good to connect and to be here today.
Now, I must say thank you very much for this.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It took me 4 years to write that in 4 months. And if you need some assistance in falling asleep, I know you do some sleep work. Maybe you can recommend it to some clients.
I'm gonna take it to our midwinter holiday. For those that aren't watching on video, this is a copy of Gary's book that he sent over, which was amazing. I don't expect gifts. I was absolutely stunned. I was a bit lost for words, and I was showing the family. But externally bulletproof, internally brittle, Gary Fahey. And I like to, at the start of the show, say where to find my guests. So literally at the front of it, we've got the websites. Now, we've got garyfahey.com, is that right?
Yeah, that works. That pretty much gets you to everything. You know, I do some things through Strongmen, but if you get to garyfahey.com, you're going to see whatever you need to see from there.
Awesome. And Strongmen on Instagram.
Correct. Strong.mend on Instagram. My original Strongmen got hacked, and so I had to start again.
I've got stories there. Look, I wanted to hit this a different way, and you almost stole my thunder because we chatted just offline there. I was going to ask you what your workout this morning was, and you said it was 18 holes of golf.
Yeah, that's right. I'm in Brisbane now, and when I moved to Brisbane, I promised myself I'd play golf. I used to play golf in Sydney and in Canberra, and clubs were in the car for 2 years before I realised that wasn't happening. So I've been up here 5 years now, and about 10 weeks ago I joined Brisbane Golf Club, and now that I've got a little bit more time, or not time, but manage my own time a lot better, I make sure that I get out once a week. It's a great place. I'm not great at golf, but it's a place I can turn my phone off. If I'm at home, I tend to be working, so it's a really good opportunity to switch off and and reflect. So yes, my workout this morning was 18 holes of rather poor golf.
I know that feeling. I'm not the best at hitting the golf ball. I'm going to come back to what you said there about managing time better, because I'm sure you've got some great points to talk about there. I just got my workout in. Excuse the red face. I put the pack on and ran up and down the hills for a bit and got back.
I prefer my bad game of golf to that.
Now, you wrote a book that's phenomenal. I'm so inspired and in awe of anybody that's written a book. And I don't know if you know Troy Knight, another Australian, but I interviewed him a while back. Wrote Havoc 06. And a couple others. But the first thing I thought to ask Troy is, how the hell did he come to write a book? You know, he's a SF operator, and a lot of the other guys do. Like you got Ollie Ollerton that you know, and so on. But what inspired you to write a book, and how did you even do that?
Well, look, I think, you know, as I'm sure we'll get into, you know, a little later, I went through some dark and troubled times, and I wasn't much of a journaler. I was a, you know, alpha male. I don't do that stuff. You know, that's for sissies or all that carry on. And but when I started to get in trouble, I'll be honest, the first thing I did was I started to write notes to almost justify my trouble to myself, like that it wasn't my fault, right? I started writing down details of everything that was going wrong. And that's why I said that, you know, it took 4 years to write the book in 4 months. Gradually that writing process matured, and I started taking notes about, you know, things that I was thinking of, things that I was being able to be honest about with myself, the way that I struggled through, things that helped me through, some clarity points. And then I really got to the stage where it was starting to make a lot of sense to me. And, you know, looking back in hindsight, it became quite logical, the process that I'd been through, and it was quite cathartic. So I kept writing, and hopefully, you know, it may help some people, but it certainly helped me through it. So yeah, that was pretty much where it came from. And look, most people have probably got a book in them. Everyone's lived a life of some sort. And you know, I tell people this about my coaching. I try and coach, or I want to be the coach that I needed, I say 5 years ago, but probably 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
And everybody's that person to somebody, you know, whether you're a stay-at-home mum, whether you're a bad golfer, you know, whether you're in the special forces or any other career, everybody's had a life that somebody else could learn from. So, you know, whether anyone reads it or anyone gets anything out of it, I certainly did. And it was a good process to go through as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I spoke to Ollie Ollerton a while back, and one of the things he said was, if you want to help yourself, help another person. When you said it was cathartic writing that book, and I find that so much. Maybe that's where we'll push into very soon. But I wanted to, you know, touch on where you are now. You've got the book, you're an author, which is great. And you mentioned coaching. What are you doing now? What is GaryFahey.com, and what is Gary Fahey's purpose now?
Yeah, look, I use a quote from, I always get his name mixed up or wrong, but Fyodor Dostoevsky is a Russian author, and he had this quote that says, I want to be worthy of my suffering. And, you know, I view my purpose now as making sure that my pain meant something. So I went through a struggle, and you know, I messed up a whole bunch of things at particular points in my life. And my purpose now is to make sure that that pain and that struggle was worth something. And so, you know, primarily, you know, my business these days, I say coaching as a bit of a midpoint, but it sort of streams anywhere from counseling through coaching and into consulting, primarily of men, primarily of high performing men. It's a language that I speak. I do coach women as well, but often high performing personalities. It's my story. I speak that language. I've been in an arena of high performance. I understand what it's like to struggle potentially with identity and purpose. And I also know what it takes to build a system and a strategy for high performance, for success, for pure success too, not just financial success. And so anywhere along that spectrum, you know, I originally started seeing men for mental health reasons. As they transitioned through that, we started coaching and then more into peak performance. So primarily it's that spectrum. I say coaching, but it's anything in there.
Absolutely. Helping others. I was stunned interviewing the Sergeant Major in the New Zealand Army the other day, and in the middle of it, he pulls out, my job is to serve others. So, he's a coach of a sort, all leaders and all mentors. But so often in this realm, it seems that people that they've gone through those dark times, I'm relating some names because you've worked with them, Jason Fox from SAS Australia and Middleton, same deal. They've all been through the swamp. They've been there and done it, and they've come out as leaders in their field, as people to learn from. And they're not psychologists, they're not psychiatrists, they're not PTSD specialists. I interviewed Tony Blau yesterday, and these are only just to give examples. The guy is a self-defense expert, but a top psychiatrist uses his tools of controlling fear, which we're going to. Again, it's something you and I probably share. And he uses those in his practice, learned from someone on the ground. And I think there's really something to say for somebody who's been there and done it, Gary, which you have. I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to paint a picture for the listeners. What I'd like to do now is paint that picture a little bit. You're famous for being head of the Prime Minister's BodyGuard team, or close protection team in the language we use. Run us through that, and then we might run back where it all got a bit wobbly.
Yeah, look, I don't know whether or not I'm famous for that. I'm probably more famous for what come after that, but that certainly became the headline grabber of stories that move forward. But I served 18 years in the Australian Federal Police, and part of what the Australian Federal Police does is look after the protection of our high office holders and international high office holders when they're in our country. And after a few years of working in close protection, managed, to get invited to be part of Kevin Rudd's election team, so protection team for the election campaign. And when he won our prime ministerial election in 2007, stayed on in that role and became one of the team leaders of that position. So that for me was only about 18 months long at that time. I went back and worked with him again in 2013. But that span of probably 7 or 8 years was close protection in Australian policing sense at the highest level. And it was a extremely enjoyable time of my career. It's problem solving on steroids. And that's what I love to do. It's not necessarily policing in nature, but it's problem solving at its most extreme, I think. And then the tactics come after that. So that was it's a fantastic time. I grew up in a western suburbs town of Sydney, working class town, and I do say to people, not too many people from Mount Druitt get to fly on the Prime Minister's plane. And if nothing else happened in my career, that was certainly a highlight.
It's not often that I and definitely the listeners in the civilian world get to pick their brains there a little bit. So I'd like to go there for a certain genre of the people who watch these shows. What was it like doing that job? Was it high stress? Was it high speed? And what sort of agencies did you interact and work with and train with?
Yeah, look, I think I'm fortunate that I'm able to look at this through hindsight, and certainly when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't appear as high stress probably as what it is. There's a saying, I think it comes from Nick Saban out of college football. We don't train until we get it right. We train until we can't get it wrong.
Yes,
and quite
point.
often I feel like, when you train or you focus your life on a particular task, and you would have found this in the special forces, it doesn't feel like it's just your job, right? It doesn't feel like it's special. It doesn't feel like there's anything different to it. It is just the work that you do. And unfortunately, I didn't keep many memories from back then because it was just my job. I didn't, but now I'm 20 years past there, or 15 years past there, and it's a little it's a little sad I don't have some of those. But the training is, I would like to think it's world class. We do our own in-house training at the Australian Federal Police, so we have former close protection officers and people that have studied close protection around the world and have gone off to do some of those training courses, around different parts of the world. I was fortunate enough to get a little bit of leave to go and do a close protection course in Arizona as well. So to see a little bit of how some of the US do their training, that was next level.
Yeah.
But we worked with a lot of Australian agencies, ASIO and the intelligence agencies, but all different ones around the world. The Secret Service are probably the ones that people would know about. But every country has a department that is responsible for the protection of their president, prime minister, or head of state. And wherever we go, we would deal with them, and we would learn from them. They would learn from us. We typically have good relationships. All the state police, of course. We couldn't do our job without the state police as well. And thankfully, we had a very good working relationship around the country. So, yeah, it's very, very wide reaching with who we might have to talk to, and anything from the Prime Minister right down to somebody that's standing in your way on a street corner. It's a complete spectrum of people to engage with.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was Waypole here, Julia Gillard came for a visit, and we did some out of court and work, and the lads and ladies came in. In my role in the Special Forces, my role was counterterrorism only. So it was all about hostage rescue and other things around that. We used to run through all the scenarios for New Zealand-based training, for the country-based training. And they were brilliant scenarios we put together. Did you guys run some interesting training exercises there when you weren't actually doing the protection, when you're doing the training side?
Yeah, we did. Look, we had specified training periods throughout the year, as I'm sure you did in SF world, and you guys probably did a little more than us. But we were fortunate to have a village down in Canberra as well, and the simunition and running through scenarios and people in buildings, and I've done a few other jobs in the AFP as well, and you do get to train, let's say, as close to real as you can. If you get shot by a sim gun at a metre or two away, it stings. I'm sure it doesn't sting like
I think I still got the scar on this hand.
Yeah, and it's amazing how many times you get shot in the knuckles. I don't know what happens there, but some of those tend to get shot in the knuckles.
It's funny you said knuckles, but I think you spelt nuts wrong for the guy that shoots you.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And there was a few arse shots going on too. I don't know if they were intended or, but yeah, there's good opportunities, especially out of Canberra, and facilities, and often in the States, you might get opportunity to train at some of the military bases that might have similar types of setups around there. But anything from we used to joke, I suppose, that we take our week off for training, and we do high risk driving at speed, shooting, simunition training in and out of rooms, and extractions, and things that executives and big corporations would pay $10,000 a week to do. I get paid to go and do it, just to practice. And, I think that, again, looking back in hindsight, and while we all want to be on the job and not take a week off to go training, when you can look back and say, these are some experiences that people just don't get to have. I think it's a fantastic way to look at the things that you get to do.
Now, like you said, when you're in that, in the job, it doesn't seem high stress. That was quite a telling thing you alluded to. Dan Pronk, again, and somebody we know, talked about the high performers seem to, things get a bit wobbly. Things went a bit wrong for you. You're very open with that. Tell us that story of where it started to change.
Yeah, again, a lot of this comes from hindsight. In the middle of it's almost like the boiling frog analogy. You put a frog in a pot, and as it slowly boils, he doesn't realize it's getting warmer and warmer. And that was certainly my my circumstance. The back end of my career, probably for about 10 years, I was battling a major depressive disorder. Certainly, I didn't have any sense of it for the first 5 of that 10 years. And
Wow.
and then for the next 5, started to use some of those typical sayings that, I just need a break. I just wait till I get to that holiday. We used to travel overseas a lot. So I'd say 14 hours on a plane with my phone off, and I'll be de-stressed and I'll be okay. But towards 2015, 2016, I'd be hugging people that I loved, but not really want to be in that hug. I just didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
And I wasn't doing anything very well except for my job, strangely enough. And the funny thing is, the best, or the most successful part of my career was probably the part that I was also depressed the most. And I also, I had a gambling problem as well. So I was somebody who gambled from time to time, didn't have a problem with it. But as my depression got worse, my escape was gambling. I was not much of a drinker. I go out and drink, have a big night, that sort of thing, but I don't drink regularly. I don't take drugs. I don't shop, but I used to gamble. And, what I found was, sometimes I talk about the confusion or the cloudiness in my head, or the noise in my head. Sometimes music would take it away. Sometimes training would take it away, but every time gambling would take it away.
Right.
And so I just found myself defaulting to gambling more and more, and maybe bigger amounts and longer periods of time. And it really became my escape. And, as I write about in the book, for a long time, when I knew I had a problem with gambling, I would continue to try and beat my gambling problem. And some people with weight issues might know that they keep trying to tackle their weight problem, but that keeps coming back. It keeps coming back. And then I tried to tackle my depression problem. And, that was a little bit more successful, but it wasn't until I attacked my ego problem. I talk about my ego, my excuse, which was depression, and my escape, which was gambling. And it wasn't until I attacked the ego problem. And for me, it wasn't an ego like a chest beating ego. It was a protectionist ego. As I mentioned before, I was a problem solver on the highest level. I couldn't face the fact that my identity was somebody who had a problem. And so my ego prevented me from exploring that within myself, being honest about the problem that I had, which meant I didn't go and speak to somebody about it, or I didn't share it with a friend, or I didn't open up to somebody like me now. And I didn't find solutions for what I was struggling with. And therefore I became more depressed, and therefore I needed more escape. And it just kept going round and round in circles. So it wasn't until I addressed the ego problem, the identity problem, the purpose problem, and almost, I say overnight, it was a 9-month process, but almost overnight, the gambling issue went away. It didn't bother me to gamble or not gamble. I don't know that I would say I've ever had depression since. I've been sad since, but I don't qualify it the same way. I have a different story now. And, so that probably that 10-year period was, I wish I existed for me 5 years earlier. Whether or not I would have gone to see me, I don't know. But yeah, that was the process through that 10-year cycle.
It's interesting. You said what you do now is coaching elite people. You relate to those people. You were one. I bet hearing that you're a bit like that, like I am, and like the other people. But from this side, you were the team leader of the Prime Minister's protection team. Talking to Mark Matheson the other day, a psychologist, and I believe you know him through the show.
Yeah, I caught that interview too. Yeah, Mark's a good chap. It was a good interview, and I used to enjoy the short conversations I'd have with Mark. He's a good fella.
He's very insightful, very clever. I don't blow smoke with the show notes, and his blew me away. Actually, I wrote so little show notes because the conversation was so interesting. When I went to write them, and then I started recording them, I had to watch the whole show again.
Yeah.
And
he's so deep and broad, Mark. And again, he's lived not a long life, but he's been into a lot of fields, and I think that gives, again, that experience. It's not just theory; it's practical knowledge that Mark brings, but Dan Pronk also, and
Yep.
others in the field as well.
Absolutely. And what it seems to be, I'm a crayon guy. That may be a weakness, well, clearly sometimes. But, it seems to be I make a pie chart, and the elite people get this big piece of the pie, this fight and flight of being elite, and they forget the other pieces of the pie that makes up life. Is that because you said you were the most depressed, but you're the best at your work? Do you see that as an interesting analogy for where you're at as well?
Yeah, and I think that's 100% right. I think the more so it also comes with a little bit of a it doesn't make sense in some sense, because I also find now in this realm, those that are the most successful in their life have a very clear identity and a picture of who they are, and it's not work-life balance, but they split their time between their performance and the other things in their life such that it matches their identity.
Yeah.
And I think when we're growing up, especially for me, maybe for men, maybe for high performers, maybe in an alpha environment, we get drawn towards one area of performance, and that is what I'm doing in my job. If I'm a sports, what I'm doing in my athletic career, and the rest of it becomes secondary. And if I can make it, I make it. But really, my focus is here. My focus is on the output of high performance.
Yeah.
But I do think that those that go to next level and sustain it for long periods of time actually find themselves, but actually create their identity around their high performing being a part of, maybe a significant part, but a part of a bigger picture, and therefore they feel a lot more comfortable in in what they're doing.
It's interesting looking back, hindsight, as you've used the word a couple of times there. It's phenomenal. I lived in the housing area for New Zealand SAS. So that meant that we live in a defence housing place here, surrounded by the guys, and you see them mowing the lawns and see the families or couples and so on. And it really astounded me that most of the operators were single or had a partner, but that often came and went. And typically the Māori guys, not many of them, but the sergeants, staff sergeants, and so on, they would have a very classic family dynamic of the female's role and the male's role. And looking back now, they've become RSMs of the unit, the highest ranking soldier. They've gone on to bigger and better things. And I mean, I know the guys, but then also interviewing publicly Widow Moffat, they've got that more completeness than the single guys or the people that go through those relationships. I say that because I remember one relationship, we looked at it and I thought, oh, they're going to be great. And they fell apart. And then he went on to become a high level operator, but then it sort of fell apart as well. I think they've got a better picture. You do need that support structure. Dan talks about it, psychological, physical, and social. Actually, Mark Mathers might have said it as well.
Yeah. It's along that line. Yeah, psychological or psychosocial and physical. And I think I tell people that in the absence of a conscious identity, in the absence of an identity that not just that you've created, but that you've articulated to yourself, in the absence of that conscious identity, we all become a victim of circumstance, or we become a victim of our conditioning. And if you are unable to articulate your identity to yourself, you start looking outside for what it is that you should be. And when you're in a high performance field, special forces, maybe the police, executives, athletes, you start to look at what other people have and think that's what you're supposed to be doing as well. Now, the crazy part about it is it might actually be true, but if you haven't attached a conscious identity to it, you will always be looking for external validation for what it is that you're doing. And so we do see a lot of relationships break up in high performance fields, because the person who is high performing very rarely sits down and says, this is who I am. This is where that relationship fits inside of this.
Yeah.
Therefore, it has a purpose to my life.
Yeah.
They just see potentially the next pretty thing that walks past and see that the next level up is dating that type of girl. So that's the girl that I'll move to. And then that's the car that I'll drive. And that's the house that I should have. But, you know, if you're happy going to your son's soccer on a Saturday, then why do you care if the neighbor next door, you know, plays golf and doesn't have any kids? Like it's really irrelevant. But if you don't know who you are, or you don't have that conscious identity, you're constantly looking for external validation to prove that what I'm doing is right.
So I guess the question next is, how did you do that? How did you release that ego? How did you find out your identity? And your post the other day on Instagram, and I'm going to put in the show notes, it was so powerful. You talked about, you know, you're going to be a crying heap on the floor once you do this. And Gary, you're a man's man to man telling you this.
Yeah.
I can see where you're at, but how did you achieve this?
Well, I achieved it with a lot of pain. Like, you know, the next part of my, you know, my gambling addiction got me into a circumstance where I made some silly mistakes with my work credit card. You know, wow. It cost me close to $2 million. It cost my career. It cost me my reputation, and it had me seriously considering, you know, the value of my own life.
Yeah.
You know, that's a pretty deep rock bottom. I don't really love the idea of rock bottom, because somebody explained to me it can always get worse. You know, if you lose one arm, you could still lose two, right? So there's always further to go if you choose to keep going. In reality, I got to a point where I was considering, you know, taking my own life, and thankfully I didn't get too far down that track. I had, you know, you start thinking about different things and ways and access to things. And, you know, I was smart enough to, or maybe scared enough to then trot off to the doctor. And what actually shifted for me was a promise I made to myself that whatever the doctor instructed me to do or said that I should do, I was going to do it, regardless of whether I thought it was the right thing or not. And so I went to a psychiatrist, and I said to myself, whatever the psychiatrist tells me, that's what I'm going to do. Whatever the psychologist tells me. And then I went to gambling help meetings, and whatever they tell me, I'm just going to keep turning up and turning up and turning up. And eventually what happened was I started to shift my identity from being a guy with a gambling problem to a guy who was overcoming a gamble, or trying to overcome a gambling problem,
right,
to a guy who was actively overcoming a gambling problem. And then one day I went to see my my nan's grave, and I'd heard a story about a guy who made a promise to his dead mother, and it was a powerful promise, you know, about not gambling. And, you know, I didn't make that same promise to my nan, but my nan was very close to me. And what I found was, in that moment, on the back of 9 months of shifting my identity to be somebody that I could rely on, it also felt like it was safe enough for me to be honest with myself. And so the breakdown was literally a brutal, honest moment of, this is where you're at. This is who you are. This is the trouble that you're in. This is the trouble that you've caused. This is the pain you've caused to other people in your life. This is it. There's nothing more to hide here. It is all out. And almost instantly from that moment, without having anything to hide from anymore, without having anything to escape from anymore, it wasn't the lies that I told everybody else that was the problem. It was the lies that I didn't even know I was telling myself that was the issue. And from that moment forward, you know, it was an up and down ride. Like, you don't get out of a $2 million gambling problem just because you make a decision.
Yeah.
But from that moment forward, everything shifted in terms of mindset, identity, purpose. And then that becomes what is the second half of my book, which is, you know, primarily two questions: pardon my language, how the fuck did I get here, and how the fuck do I get out? And from that moment, I started working on the how the fuck do I get out part. And, you know, I think a lot of people spend too much time in the how did I get here part, and don't worry about taking action to get out. You know, they might spend 3 years exploring why I'm here, and unfortunately you're 3 years further down the track. But yeah, so that was pretty much how I arrived at, you know, a crisis point, and then a changing point, and then a an upward trajectory point, I suppose.
This is interesting. And I love organically getting to know a person. That's actually part of my social healing, I think, doing these things, and also getting to know the story and comprehend the story. Just as you're talking, Gary, most of the people that do this sort of thing that you're at are males. Now, Jordan Peterson says the two sexes, if that's the right word in 2022, look at a problem. Yeah, good. They look at a problem and they have two different actions. The man will want to take action. So the woman's coming to him with a problem, the wife or whoever, and she's talking, and he goes, right, well, this is the action. Here's what you're going to do. And the woman wants to just talk about it. Now both are remiss, because the man who just wants action, he hasn't done all the talking, but then the woman who does the talking doesn't want to take the action. It's interesting that all the people that are writing these books are helping, well, here we are, helping people out with, breakpoint, like Ollie does, and you went on SAS Australia, which you talk about, are males. But what you've stated is you didn't dwell, but you did definitely explore the, how did I get here? You went through all the hows, the nuances, that's the word Jordan Peterson uses, all the nuances around the problem, but then you took action. Do you think that's a male's difference?
Yeah, look, I think, and it's probably why I end up coaching as well, a little bit more in the male space. But as I said, I do coach some females, but they're usually high performing, and it's probably, I think Jordan Peterson often talks about at the extremes as well. So at the extremes, you've got men, action takers, and females more tend to want to talk about the problem and to get it out and those sorts of things. And certainly there's some crossovers in the middle.
Yep.
But for me, I'm a practical thinker, whether it's because I'm a man or because of the way I'm wired or whatever reason. I'm a practical thinker, and I talk about now, and most of my coaching philosophy is about the mechanics, the mindset, and the momentum. In my own journey, I had to understand the mechanics of how it worked. So it's why I just about finished a master's in brain and mind sciences. So
wow.
I had to start understanding the neuroscience, or the brain. How is this working, right? Like I couldn't believe that I was just an anomaly and it just happened, or it was chemical, or I don't even know about genetic. I don't even know that I really believe in that 100% of the time. I think it plays a part, but I think we have a lot more agency in where we end up than purely to blame genetics or chemicals.
Absolutely.
And so if I could understand it, my view was I could probably fix it, or I could at least start to build a strategy. It's what I did for 20 years. It's what I did very well. So if I understood it, I can build a strategy to fix it. So I went down that mechanics path, but then you have to get your mindset in the right. I can't be a victim if I want to get better, regardless of whether or not I feel like somebody's wronged me.
Yeah.
I can't fix it if I think it's somebody else's problem. So, you have to shift your mindset, but there is nothing truer than you get nowhere if you don't move, right? Yeah. Like, you probably would have learned, get off the X, right? When, if you bog down, it doesn't matter where you move, you have to move.
Yeah.
Now, you'll figure it out along the way. That's why I talk about momentum. Just get moving, and you can do your work on the past, and you can do your work on where you're at, but it doesn't need to be years long. And we do also know that there's every chance that the position that you arrive at might be a lie anyway. The thing that you've found, there is some science that suggests 50% of our memories at a particular point in life are made up, or at least some version of reality. So that, some story has got in there. I saw a picture and somehow I remember it this way. And, and look, my nan passed away, the one that I was very close to in 2007. And I started gambling a little bit more from that time. And maybe I started getting depression because she passed away. But maybe I was in a high stress job, and maybe I was going through a divorce at the time. And maybe it was because, I was away from home, and I could spend years trying to figure out which one it was. I might even think I know which one it was. It could be wrong, but it really doesn't matter because I've still got to do something.
Yeah.
Right. And so to me, that's where it really, where the rubber hits the road. You've got to do something, even if it's one thing today, even if you don't know what your problem is, but you do something. Tie your shoes up and go for a walk. It's something that you didn't do yesterday. And that's how we start to shift our identity. We do repeat day after day. Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about 95% or 90% of the things we do today are the things we did yesterday. It's efficiency of brain pattern that just repeats behavior, thought, action. And if you want to change that, you have to do something different. I build little systems to help people change incrementally over a long period of time, to the point where you get 6 weeks down the track, 6 months down the track, and you look back and you don't even realize the person that you've become now, because it's so far different over a 6-month period. It's amazing how far you can travel in 6 months if you go 100 meters a day. It's a long way.
Absolutely. For the different levels of where people are at that are listening, the big picture stuff, that could be comprehending that, but just at the little places, you said tie your shoes and go for a walk. Sometimes people are so in that dark place they can't get out of bed. So that, you skimmed over it quickly, but I picked up on it. Literally, it could just be, right, there's my shoes. I'll just put them on. Because every other time in your life, for how many thousands of days you've been alive, after you tie your shoes, you're probably going to move. So that could be the boost that someone listening right now needs, or it could be the thing you said, looking goal setting for 6 months. But same in the special forces, for the selections that we do, the SEALs are a classic at it. They say, just make it to breakfast. I'm going to get out of bed and make it to breakfast. Okay, now I'll just make it to lunch. Because if they look at how weak, or they look at the 6 months or the 2 years, it's too much. So what a great quote. Just tie your shoes and get out for a walk. It's a start.
Well, you told a story when you had another friend of both of ours, I suppose, Isabella Rossitano on, and you told that story about taking the ladder through the deep scrub, and you were moving a foot at a time, right? Now, what would have happened if you tried to envisage 1 kilometer's time? It's a task that's too big, but what's not too big is the first, is your 1 meter space, or your 3 feet space, or your 1 foot, or whatever you want to call it. And that's a space that you can control. A lot of this is about controlling the things that you control. I'm very big on Stoic philosophy, and working on those things that you can control really helps you start to get momentum. And James Clear in his Atomic Habits book talks about a fella that goes to the gym. I'll get this a little bit wrong, but he only went for 5 minutes a day for like 6 months, and he'd be halfway through exercises and he'd walk out. But his job was to become a person who went to the gym. That was it. Once he was a person who goes to the gym, then he could worry about being a person who works out for half an hour. We want to go from a person who sits on the couch all day to a person that works out 6 days a week, 4 hours a day. And we think that's just a straight jump, but it's not. You've got to become a person that puts your shoes on first, right? That's, again, I talk about what is one thing that you can do that will get you closer, or what thing first? What's the first thing you need to do? I heard somebody talk about helping, I think their analogy was sick children in Africa. If you want to help sick children in Africa, the first thing you have to do is buy a ticket to Africa. Not tell everybody you want to help sick kids in Africa, right? No. If you want to go for a walk, the first thing you have to do is put your shoes on. That's all you're in control of. After that, then what's the first thing you can do? Open the door. And eventually, you turn around 6 months later and realize you're a completely different person. And that's where the magic is. The magic isn't in the big gesture. It's doing the little thing, small step, every day, constantly.
And it's also not linear. And that's, again, someone that has been a high performer, and that type is, we think it's linear. We think we're here, we need to get here, you just go. And that came out of Dan Pronk's book, Resilience Shield. For those people listening, we're not preaching, definitely not. We're not saying you need to start here and go to there. You have your downs. It's not linear, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, but it's progressive. And like I said, 6 months later, you've realized you've done 600 kilometers or whatever it is. But, life is not linear.
No, it's right. And look, if you spent the year and again, I try and break down for my clients that, I talk about winning the day. I'm not the only person, and I got it from other people as well. But if you had one task to do today, and that's all you needed to do to win the day, don't focus on losing 10 kilos or making $1 million or stopping drinking.
Yeah.
If your one task today is, I always get my clients, most of them at the start, especially if they're struggling, don't hit snooze for a week on your alarm clock, right? A lot of people struggling hit snooze on their alarm. It's a terrible thing to do. It's a subconscious reminder that your day is going to be shit and you do not want to start your day.
Yep.
So don't do it, right? But it's a very small thing. But if you can not hit snooze, you've won the day. I don't care what happens in the rest of your day. Because too often we focus on the fact that I haven't lost 10 kilos yet. I haven't made $1 million yet. I haven't quit drinking yet. And it's a negative story.
Yeah.
But if you become a person who keeps promises to yourself, and you only made one promise, and that was don't hit snooze. Next week, you can do something else. And next week, you can do something else. And all of a sudden, you become a person, self-confidence. Another guy that I follow and have been coached by, Ed Milet, says, self-confidence is really just the process of keeping promises to yourself.
Yeah.
It's not about the big gesture. If you keep little promises to yourself, all of a sudden you have self-confidence, which means when a big task comes up, you actually believe that you can do it. We get to New Year's Eve and people make these big claims and they've got a 30-year history of failing on their promise. And for some reason, they think that a big promise is going to shift their momentum. Well, you need to make that promise on November 1 and start incrementally building to it so that on January 1, you actually have some belief that you can change who you are.
Yeah, that's very clever. Changing who you are. We've almost got to that stage. We talked about how you started to do that and some processes. You came to my world when we were watching SAS Hell Week. I really saw you in the mirror room, in the interrogation room. But let's go back a stage. What made you make the decision to apply for that show? Where were you in your headspace, and what was it like going on?
Yeah, look, I think we touched a little on where I'll go earlier when we were talking about the trials and tribulations of the DS, and then coming out the other side. And, I started, again, I've heard you say, I started from watching SAS Who Dares Wins in the UK. And
yeah,
I really loved, I suppose I was just beginning or a little bit of the way through my own personal transformation at that time.
Yep.
And I really loved the notion of breaking people down in order to rebuild it in a better way.
Yep.
And what I loved about the show was taking ordinary people and allowing the vulnerability that I had to share with myself. So my brutal, honest moment with my nan's grave, I was seeing people have that moment with Ant and with Ollie and with Billy, with Foxy, that they hadn't realized that they were actually harboring all these lies that they were telling themselves. And then the moment that they got them out, you could see a real shift in, whether it's relief or confidence, or I'm not hiding anything anymore, or I can be me now, or it's just out, right? Like it's no longer occupying real estate in my head. And, so I was originally drawn to it for that reason. And, again, I think I was a little bit further on in my journey. But the thing that I admired about all the DS staff too, and why I wanted to be around people like that is, I've worked with some special forces before in Timor and some other places, and their careers, and it's an amazing job that you and them have done. But I was more enamored with the fact that these guys were they were high performing people that had some really dark struggles in their life, and they've all been quite open about those struggles that they've gone through. And then they've managed to rebuild their identity with themselves, not with the public, but they've rebuilt their identity with themselves. And, that's the journey that I want to be on constantly. Whether or not I'm there yet, I don't know, but that's the journey that I want to be on. And I want to I want to surround myself with people like that. You know, I want to be close to people like that. I want to learn from people like that. And I also wanted to see whether or not some of the work that I'd done myself, was I still lying to myself, right? I wanted to prove to myself, or to see, you know, I figured that if I was still lying to myself, this process will break me down to the point where, you know, I'll be defiant to them. I won't be taking on board what they were saying. And, you know, so I suppose it was a little test and for me to see, am I at where I think I'm at? And, you know, thankfully I believe I was. There's certainly some parts of it that I've reflected on that I needed to keep working on or changing and that sort of thing. But that was primarily the reason that I wanted to go on. Again, a bit of a journey through liking the show, liking what the show was about, having the respect for the DS and the journeys they've taken post SF world, and then a little bit of a blowtorch to myself. So, you know, going on was very difficult for me. If you watch the shows, clearly I wasn't probably in the best physical shape that I've been in. I'm probably a lot better now if they want to call me to go on the next series. But you know, it was to me, I had an opportunity, not a very pleasant one, but one that could have seen me take an easy option in terms of the SAS and not go. As you might have seen from the clips, my son passed away literally the week before we went. It was 5 days before I left Brisbane to go. Wow. Now, my son and my stepson had a lifelong genetic disorder, and it wasn't a surprise or shock that it happened. We weren't necessarily expecting it to be then. And you know, that made it very difficult for me to want to then up and leave family and you know, and loved ones. And we made very sure that my wife and my elder stepson went to his father's place, and my wife had a best friend from school come up, and they went away on their own, you know, holiday away. And so once I was comfortable that they were okay, you know, for that period, I did sit with myself to think, you know, this will never happen again, right? I was 45. I was probably at the upper limit of what they were prepared to take, or I might have been 44 or something at the time. And this is my chance, and it's not the best time, but you don't always get to choose when the opportunity comes. You just get to choose whether you say yes or no. And, you know, I did also make a promise to my son that I would go and I told him I would get to the end. And I said to myself that, you know, the end is my end as far as I can go. If I can get as far as I can go in these conditions, then it was going to be a good experience for me. So there's a lot going on. And again, on reflection and in hindsight, I would still have gone. I would have preferred to be a little more prepared. But other things were more important to me, to be honest, in the lead up to that period. And but the experience itself, if I can separate it from, you know, that sad time of what was going on at home, the experience itself was fantastic. I mean, it was what I wanted it to be. The participants were, you know, fantastic people. It was tough as buggery. It was cold. It was wet, but it wasn't what I wasn't expecting, I suppose, you know. So it was a great experience. And, you know, fortunately for me, one of many in my life that's helped reshape, you know, the way that I want to approach different things in my world.
And that's really what those things do. It's very rare in the civilian world to be able to challenge yourself like that. And it's great for you to go from all your career path and all those challenges you face day to day. Again, is it shaping you to be able to go and challenge yourself again and put yourself to that blowtorch and see where you are. It's very rare, I think, to have that. It's so humble for people like yourself to go on and show it publicly. Hell Week, were you told it was just going to be that? Did you sign up just for that? What was the story there compared to everything else that's done before, like SAS Australia and SAS Who Dares Wins?
Yeah, look, I was kind of hoping. I knew it was a Hell Week when I said yes to it, we knew it was a shorter. Well, I did. I don't know about the others, but I knew it was going to be a shorter stint. We were, told we were going on with a lot less preparation time as well. I think it's just how, opportunity again. The DS were here. Everything was ready to rock and roll, and let's get it done. And again, I'm very fortunate that I've done some reflective work in my time, and I'm quite stoic in my thinking. And again, I can't change any of that. I just work with whatever was there. And so yes, we knew it was going to be shorter. I personally would have preferred the longer version. I was really hoping for, and I know they don't tend to do this in the Australian one anymore. I think they did in the first, but I wanted to test myself in those interrogation type of situations.
Yeah,
I understand the mindset and the mental aspect of continuing to put yourself through the physical pain, and you keep going and keep going, and it's the mind that gives up. And I really appreciate that. I really wanted to test myself in that. Can I wait this out in a box for 24 hours? And can I, will I break when it gets too tough and I've got to, piss my pants and that sort of stuff like that. That was kind of what I was hoping for. That's what I had seen. That's not the opportunity that we had. So I had to take what I could from our opportunity. And, so maybe it was, I don't know. I wasn't on any of the others. It tended to be quite physical, very quickly. Certainly, I know it looks different on TV, but from what the other seasons have been, seem to maybe have a little bit longer, drawn out process, but no easier. I don't know that they crammed 12 days into 5 for us, but
it looks like they did their best, to be honest.
Yeah, but it was, again, it was a fantastic experience. I remember saying to Luke, we got kicked out of the helicopter because we lost a race up the wire ladder, and 3 of us got kicked out 3 separate times. And I said, there's 14 people on this program, only 3 got to jump out of the helicopter. That's an experience that 3 people don't, that only 3 people have got. 3 civilians on Australian SAS. Again, that's the way I tend to look at things these days. I didn't lose. I lost the race, but I actually got something more than the person who got their ride in the helicopter. I've ridden in a helicopter before. I don't need to do that again. But I hadn't jumped out of one into the water. So, the perspective of things, changes a little, I think, with maturity and experience. So it was fantastic.
That's perfect segue into my next question or point. Your perspective, looking through those different tinted glasses, getting to be able to do a water jump. When you went into the mirror room and the interrogation room, and the lads found out what you did for a job. So I've watched, I think I've watched just about all the seasons, again, back to the originals, and straight away you're on the same page as the guys. I don't know if you've watched it back, but you see their faces, and I'll ask the lads when they get a chance to interview them as well. You're one of them, because someone running the close protection team for the Prime Minister, the CT teams and different special force units have worked with those guys at that level. And then when they realize what happened with your son, and I'm so sorry for your loss, their faces changed again, and they were literally going, they were stumped like I was. What are you doing here? And I'm so thankful that you've gone through your reasons why, and so thankful you got to do that as well, because you wouldn't have that gauge of where you're at. It obviously served you really well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And look, I say now, it's I don't say this, I don't mean it in a terrible way to the people that I hurt in the past, but I lost $2 million, my career, my reputation, and it's almost the best thing that ever happened to me. It really did allow me to do the work I needed to find my identity and purpose and move towards this stage in my life. And it did help me work through, the process when my son passed away. It does help me see better things, and it does help me be grateful for the things that I have. I've found a way to be grateful for the shit in my life. Like, I wish that the gambling didn't happen, and I wish I didn't hurt people, and I wish I didn't make mistakes. But if I can set aside the fact that that did happen, and I can find something from them to be grateful for, that I can learn from, that can make me better, you know, it gives me a different way to look at trauma, at trouble, you know, at things that are going wrong, you know. And a lot of people out there are struggling, you know. It doesn't matter what time we're watching this, you know. More people than me, plenty more people than me, have lost loved ones. Plenty of people have lost loved ones in horrific circumstances. Plenty of people have lost themselves. They've lost their jobs. They've lost, you know, partners and money, and, you know, and a whole range of things. And all of those things are terrible events. I've learned to be able to look at terrible events from my life and pick out great things about them. You know, nothing is ever black and white, or nothing is, there is, you know, Shakespeare said, there is no good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
Wow.
And I don't know that there's anything in this world that is truly all bad, that you can't have learned some resilience from, that you can't have built something out of, that you can't be appreciative for what you have, even after all the stuff you've lost. And, you know, that really is a perspective that I live by now. It's not an easy one sometimes, right? I get sad, I get angry, I you know, still get very emotional about my son passing away. I still get emotional about my nan passing away 15 years ago. But I now look at those emotions as being, you know, they're normal reactions to horrific or terrible things. They're not depression for me, right? If I hold on to them as negative feelings for 2 weeks and 2 months and 2 years, they become depression.
Yeah.
At the moment, they're just a normal emotion to an upsetting stimulus. But then I get a chance to say, you know what? You know, we had COVID lockdown. I got to spend, my gym closed. I had a gym at the time. My gym closed for 12 weeks. We had no income. But I spent 12 weeks with my son, who I was only going to get another year with, right?
Wow.
12 weeks of every day.
Wow.
How can I be angry at that, right? Like,
Yeah.
yes, I didn't have any income at the time, but how can I be upset that for whatever reason, God or the universe closed Brisbane down, and I got to spend 12 weeks with my son. I got to spend 12 weeks with my family.
Yeah.
I know being locked down wasn't great, but for me, I was able to shift and say, well, yeah, look, it's not great. I wish I had income, but I've got this to look forward to. And I think that really does help, you know, people move through emotions that they have.
Just the whole time you were saying that, the title, the gift of adversity, came to mind. Marcus Aurelius Anderson, and he was on the interview last week.
He's in a coaching group that I'm in.
Excuse me?
He and I are in, I haven't spoken to him, but we're in a coaching group, Ed Milet and Andy Frizella, Arate.
Wow.
Yeah, Arate Syndicate. So I was interested to see that interview, because yeah, I haven't had a chance to one-on-one with Marcus yet, but hopefully I do.
Oh, great guy. But you're literally the Aussie version, and so many of us speak the same language. You know, what you can take out of it. And it's not about having fake gratitude, like I'm grateful for the plant growing or whatever, the oxygen it gives off. It's having actual gratitude, actual authenticity. But what's interesting, you said at the start of that, you know, or so many people are going through things, you know, they've lost loved ones, they've lost, they're going through divorce, they've lost money. So many things happen to so many people. But back in our day, there was no how-to manual of how to go through that. You know, I think back in our day, I think about our mums when we were kids. Somebody would have a nervous breakdown and go to the hospital for a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah, or they'd have a turn, or they'd be, you know, there'd be some other name that they would give it, you know.
Yeah. So I think it's really helpful when we're putting this content out there. We're all saying the same thing. All the guests I interview say the same thing, different accent and maybe different verbiage. Like Conrad Smith, the All Black, the verbiage around retiring at 30 years old. and what that does to a
Yeah.
high performance person. So I think it's really helpful here for people of all sorts. You know, it's not just the transitioning special forces guys. It could literally be that mum that is looking at her, she had a career and now she's a mum to a 1-year-old and sleep deprived for 5 more years.
Yeah, if I could just cut in there, I mean, this happens to everybody at different stages of their life. Now, you know, it's almost an anecdotal story about the 60-year-old man who retires from work and then dies shortly after. But what happens, you know, most people in life tend to get attached to an identity based around what they do. Now, there's probably a good reason for this. When I meet somebody, we all have a conversation. The first thing is, what is your name? What do you do? It almost is intrinsically linked with who you are. The problem is that, you know, who you are is never what you do, but we get tied to it for so long. So you talk about the new mum who maybe had a career before. Her identity was as a career woman. And now all of a sudden she's a mum. She's not a career. If I'm not a career woman, then who am I? People face this with divorce. If you've been married for 10 or 20 years, your identity is shaped around being a married, you know, father of 2 kids. Well, if I'm not a married father of 2 kids, who the hell am I? Right? And like, when that gets taken away from you, or you make a choice to remove yourself from that, and you know, maybe even worse, what a lot of people do is they stay somewhere too long because they can't, they fear facing this person that they don't know who, you know, who's that identity. Police officers, military people, sports people, at particular points in their life, you know, you would have identified as a military officer. You know, Conrad Smith would have identified as a footballer. And you know, he did retire from being a footballer. He didn't retire from life, though, right? And you get that point in your, or you know, where you have to start asking, what is my identity? And what you do might make up some part of your identity, but if what you do is your identity, you're in a world of hurt when that comes crumbling down. And again, a lot of the people that I coach, they get to that 35, you know, 40, and they're still striving for, you know, some version of success that they've been socially conditioned to go after, and it doesn't match with their subconscious identity, one that they've never articulated to themselves. So they start to feel off. They start to feel miserable. They start to look to drink a little more, you know, to cover that up. They start to take drugs a little more. They'll find a new girlfriend. They might buy a new car. They might go on a flash holiday. All the time we keep thinking this new thing is going to bring me the joy or the happiness. So what's simpler than that? You know, you just have to do a little hard work for 6 months on understanding who you are. And most of the time that goes away, right? Like, then you can start to really work on peak performance.
It's amazing. It really is. You know, you're really speaking to what Mark Matheson was saying, typically, especially for the sports person. You know, what if at 19, 20, they suffer a career-ending injury? He talked about, okay, we'll just keep on going that way. We'll push the elite thing, and we'll fix all those other things when you finish. We'll just plug it all in. And that's just not the way it works. And it's looking back as a dad to a 7-year-old, it's not the way I'm going to raise him. Right now I'm trying to grow all the things rather than going to here. And you do come out with a more complete person, because you are able to still be elite and perform at that level. And I would suggest a little bit better as well.
Yeah, I agree. As I said, I think the ultimate of high performers in the world have a very clear understanding of who they are and how what they do fits into who they are, not the other way around.
Yeah.
You know, I don't care whether it's business, whether it's sports. You know, you can get by on being the best talent for a period of time, but how many great talents end up in, you know, trouble on a Friday night at the pub, right?
Yep.
And it's not until they start to do some work on themselves that then you've seen a lot of people's career where they've seemingly gone to the next level. You know, they've created, there's a bit of maturity that's come, and that maturity is getting a little bit clearer on who you are, being a little bit more comfortable with who you are, and knowing what the fundamentals are. And it was a good point that Mark made in that in that interview that you guys did, that we do tend to say just keep going, high performance, we can fix the other stuff later. We're in Australia, there's 3,300 people take their lives every year. They don't get the chance to fix that other stuff later, right? And this is where we end up if we don't work on those things, and sure, 3,300 people, that's the extreme, but there's another 30 to 50,000 that attempt it. We're also talking about people that, like me, I gambled away $2 million that I didn't have to. I lost relationships that I didn't have to.
Yeah.
It's not just the extreme. There's everything from, pure peace and then all the way up. And the longer we wait until we do that work, it doesn't have to come at the expense of your performance. No. And as you said, it actually can improve your performance. But the longer you wait to explore that part of yourself, that Simon Sinek, the reason why, and all of that sort of stuff, the longer you take, the deeper in debt and the deeper in the hole, and the more carnage that you're going to take through. And that becomes a lot harder. Trust me, 10 years of it is very hard to overcome. And it's not overcome without a significant level of sacrifice and pain. I can tell you that from personal experience.
Gary, it's been phenomenal to hear your journey and your wisdom, and you've thrown the title of the show out there straight away, making sure my pain meant something. And after listening to you and getting to know your story, I do think it does mean something. I think you're helping others. I'm looking forward to the book. Thank you. I've only done audiobooks for the last year. I've been so busy. We didn't talk about managing time, but I will touch on that at a later stage with you. I'm going to manage my time, and I'm going to read that on my holiday. So I'm going to switch off.
Good. Yeah, I appreciate that, mate. I appreciate the kind words and having me on. I think, like you said previously, that, a lot of the people that you've had on say the same thing, maybe in a different way. And what I hope is, there's more than enough people out there that are looking for somebody to, maybe to help them, maybe to understand them. And the more voices that are out there in a different way, in a different nuance, will hopefully attract more people to, to recognize. Maybe people can hear something in our discussion today that resonates with them, and allows them to explore something a little further, as as all your other conversations have had, mate. So look, I'm looking forward to you being a part of your journey, and I think staying connected and friends along the way. I think we share some similar paths, and it's been good to be on here with you today.
Absolute pleasure, Gary. Thank you so much for your time. Looking forward to connecting more in the future. I'll let pause, we'll have a chat, but thank you for coming on.
Appreciate it, mate. Cheers.